convent was quiet, as it often was, with the soft echo of footsteps in long stone hallways and the rustle of robes moving from one duty to another. Among the sisters was one who rarely drew attention to herself, an elderly nun with a kind but tired face, who moved slowly but with purpose. She was known simply as Sister Maria. For many years she had lived within the walls of the convent. Keeping to her prayers and her work, she swept the hall floors, tended the garden, and folded laundry neatly. Her presence was gentle, almost invisible, yet steady enough that everyone relied on her quiet strength. To most, she was just the quiet nun, always serving, never speaking of herself. The younger sisters sometimes asked her questions about her past, but she would only smile softly and turn the conversation toward them. No one really knew what her life had been before she came here, and no one pressed too hard to find out. The piano sat in the hall, polished, though rarely played. The sound of it would sometimes fill the convent when the younger sisters practiced, but Sister Maria never touched it. She would walk past it with her broom in hand, her eyes lowering, her lips tightening just a little, as if the sight of it stirred something deep within her. The children from the village often came to visit on Sundays, and when they gathered in the hall, their laughter would bounce against the stone walls like sunlight breaking through clouds. They would play games, sing little songs, and sometimes sit around the piano, clapping as one of the younger nuns pressed the keys with simple melodies. One Sunday, a child looked up at Sister Maria and asked with innocent boldness, "Do you play?" The hall grew a little quiet, the other children turning their eyes to her. Waiting, the young nun who had been at the piano laughed lightly and said, "Oh, she doesn't play. Sister Maria only listens." Maria smiled politely, her wrinkled hands tightening against her robe. "Music is for young ones like you," she said softly. "My hands are too old." The children accepted her answer quickly, for they were eager to laugh again. But her words left a small ache inside her. Later, when the hall was empty, she lingered near the piano. Her reflection looked back at her from its polished surface. She raised her hand as if to touch the keys, but pulled it back quickly. Shaking her head, she whispered a short prayer, then walked away into the shadows of the corridor. The younger sisters noticed these small things. The way Maria's gaze lingered, the way her voice grew quieter when the piano was mentioned, but they said nothing. They had learned that Maria carried a silence about her past, and silence in the convent was a thing respected. At night, when all was still, sometimes one or two sisters would pass by her room and hear her humming softly. The sound was not random or broken. It carried a beauty, a depth that seemed to come from far away. The tune drifted into the hallways like a ghost of something lost. The young ones would pause and listen, their hearts touched by it. They whispered to one another about her. "Do you think she used to play? Do you think she was a musician once?" But they never dared ask, and Maria never explained, despite her silence. The others could not help but feel comfort in her presence. There was a peace about her, the kind that came from someone who had lived through much, but chose not to speak of it. The quiet nun was a mystery, but she was also like a mother to them, steady, watchful, always there. Seasons passed, the garden she tended bloomed in spring and withered in winter. But Sister Maria never changed. She grew older, slower, but she never stopped working, never stopped praying, and never stopped keeping her secrets. And yet, hidden behind those quiet eyes, behind those wrinkled hands that scrubbed floors and folded cloth, there was a story no one in the convent had ever heard. A story that began long before she took her vows. A story that had once filled concert halls. Not chapels, but for now, she was only Maria, the quiet nun, moving silently past the piano in the hall, carrying with her the weight of a life that no one knew, and a music that remained locked inside her heart. Waiting for the moment it could no longer be contained, the piano in the convent hall had always been there, standing like a silent witness to years gone by. Its black surface gleamed faintly under the soft light of the tall windows. Its keys, though old, still shone with a pale brightness, and its strings, when struck, carried sound that could fill every corner of the hall. For most of the sisters, it was simply an instrument, a tool for songs during gatherings, a companion for hymns. But for Sister Maria, it was something else. She never said what it meant to her, but anyone who watched closely could see how she slowed when she passed it. How her eyes flickered just for a breath, with something that looked like longing. On ordinary days, the piano was touched by eager fingers of the younger nuns, who played simple scales or practiced cheerful tunes for Sunday visitors. Their music was kind but unpolished, notes often stumbling, rhythms breaking apart. Yet the children from the village clapped and laughed, delighted by any sound. For them, music was joy, not perfection. Sister Maria would stand in the back, her broom in hand, sweeping the edges of the hall as if she were not listening. But in truth, she heard every note. Each mistake tugged gently at something inside her. Each tune reminded her of a world she had walked away from. When she closed her eyes at night, she did not hear prayers in her head. She heard music one evening when the hall was empty. Maria walked slowly toward the piano. The moonlight shone through the tall windows, casting pale silver across the keys. She reached out with a trembling hand and let her fingers rest on the cool surface. It was the first time she had touched it in many years. The wood felt alive beneath her palm, as if waiting. Her heart beat faster. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She wanted to press down, just once, just to hear a sound, but before she could, footsteps echoed from the corridor. She pulled her hand back quickly. Retreating into the shadows, a young sister entered, carrying folded cloth. She smiled politely at Maria, not knowing how close the old nun had come to breaking her own silence. In the days that followed, the piano became something of a secret between Maria and herself. She never spoke of it, but she found herself drawn to it late at night, standing near it when no one was around. She would whisper prayers, but beneath those prayers were unspoken words. Should I? Dare I? The other sisters noticed her strange pauses. One evening, two of them hid in the hallway watching quietly as Maria stood by the piano. Her hands trembled. She did not play, but the way she looked at the instrument spoke louder than any sound. When she finally walked away, the younger nuns exchanged whispers. She knows, one said. She must have played before. Words spread among the sisters, not in a harsh way, but with gentle curiosity. Soon, whenever the piano was mentioned, eyes would drift toward Maria. She would smile faintly. But she said nothing. Her silence only deepened the mystery. One afternoon, during a practice session, a child asked again, "Sister Maria, will you play?" The young nun at the piano laughed and shook her head. "She doesn't play." But this time, the child would not stop. "Please. Just one song?" Maria shook her head softly. "No, little one, not me." Her voice carried kindness, but also finality. Yet, after the children left, Maria remained in the hall, staring at the piano. She whispered to herself, "Just one song." Her hands trembled again. She reached down and pressed one key. Out. The sound rang out, soft but pure, echoing like a bell through the quiet room. She froze, listening. Her breath caught. It was only a single note. Ow. But it awakened something she thought she had buried forever. From that night onward, she began to test the piano in secret. At first, just one key, then two, soft and quick. Always stopping at the slightest noise, the music returned to her slowly like water seeping through cracks. Each note stirred memories of concert halls, bright lights, and an audience that once held its breath for her. She could see it all in her mind. Though she tried to push it away, but the piano would not let her forget. It became a mirror of her soul, reflecting both her silence and her longing. She began to realize that no matter how much she had hidden, the music inside her was still alive. It waited, patient and powerful, for the day when she would no longer hide. The other nuns did not know this yet. The children did not know. And the village beyond the convent certainly had no idea that the quiet nun, the one who swept floors and carried baskets, had once carried entire halls into silence with her playing. But the piano knew. It stood there waiting, day after day. A silent companion, a secret keeper, and deep inside, Maria felt the pull growing stronger. She did not know when or how. Ow. But she knew the moment would come when the keys would no longer remain untouched, when the hidden piano would reveal what no one had yet seen. The convent was often quiet during the week, but Sundays were different on those days. Children from the village would come with their parents. Their laughter and voices filled the halls. They ran across the stone courtyard, played games, and filled the air with life that softened the stillness of convent walls. The sisters welcomed them warmly, guiding them in songs and prayers. Sometimes they baked small loaves of bread for the children. Other times they told them stories. But the part everyone loved most was when the piano in the hall came to life, one bright Sunday afternoon. After the prayers were finished, the younger nuns gathered the children in the hall. The piano stood waiting. Polished and shining under the light, a young sister sat at the bench and began to play a cheerful tune. The children clapped along, their hands making a rhythm of their own. Some even danced in small circles, giggling loudly in the back of the hall. Sister Maria stood with her hands folded. She always stood there, quiet, watchful. Her eyes softened. When she looked at the children, their joy warmed her heart. But when her gaze fell on the piano, her smile grew faint when the song ended. One boy raised his hand. His face was bright with curiosity. "Can Sister Maria play?" he asked aloud. His voice carried across the room. And suddenly, every child turned their eyes toward her. The younger sister at the piano laughed nervously. "Oh no, she doesn't play," she said, trying to move things along. But the boy insisted. "But why not?" "She looks like she knows how," Maria smiled, trying to brush away their request with gentle words. "No, little one, my hands are too old now." Her voice was calm, but her heart beat faster. The children didn't stop. Another girl with braids said, "Please, just one song. I want to hear her." Others joined in, their voices mixing together. "Please, Sister Maria, please play." The hall filled with their chants, light and playful but persistent. Maria's lips trembled into a smile. She raised her hands gently, as if to hush them. "Not today, children. It is better that you enjoy the music of youth," she said, but the children were not easily convinced to them. Sister Maria was more than just another nun. She had a kindness that made them feel safe, a warmth in her eyes that told them she carried something special. They could not explain it, but they felt it. And they wanted to see what secret she carried, the Mother Superior, who stood by the door. Watch the scene quietly, she noticed. The way Maria's eyes moved to the piano and back again. She saw the hesitation, the way her hands tightened slightly as if holding something in. But she said nothing, only her gaze grew thoughtful. After much laughter and pleading, the children gave up. The young nun returned to the piano and played another simple song. The voices of the children rose again as they sang along. But the air felt a little different now. Maria stood still, her smile fading slightly. Her secret had been brushed too, close to the surface that evening when the children had gone. And the hall was quiet again. Maria lingered near the piano. She ran her hand across the wooden edge, her heart heavy with memory. She whispered softly, "They see it, even when I hide it." Her voice broke, but she quickly crossed herself and walked away. The next few weeks, the children returned as usual, but their curiosity did not fade. Every time they saw her, one or two of them would ask, "Will you play today?" Their eyes were wide with hope. Maria always shook her head, but inside, she felt the pull growing stronger. One night, unable to sleep, she sat in her small room, her hands folded tightly. Her mind wandered to her younger years, to the bright lights of a grand hall, to the applause that had once surrounded her. The memory was both sweet and painful, for she had chosen to bury that life, to silence it when she entered the convent, yet now children with innocent eyes were pulling that silence apart. They saw her not as someone finished, but as someone holding a gift. Their requests planted a seed in her heart, a seed she could no longer ignore. She found herself humming more often. Sometimes she pressed her fingers against the wooden table, as if playing invisible keys. The other sisters noticed. They did not say anything, but in their hearts, they began to wonder when the quiet nun would finally break her silence. And so, the days moved on. Each Sunday, the children would laugh and play, and always at least one would turn to Maria with that same question, "Will you play for us?" and each time she would smile and shake her head, but deep inside, the request was no longer just from the children. It was from her own soul, knocking gently, reminding her that the music inside her had not died. The piano waited in the hall, its keys resting like a row of secrets. The children's laughter echoed in her ears long after they had gone, and Sister Maria knew, though she tried to deny it, that the day would soon come when she could no longer refuse their request. The convent had always been a place of silence, not just in its halls, but in the hearts of those who lived there. Every sister carried her own story, but most stories stayed untold. They were folded away like old letters never opened. Sister Maria's silence was the deepest of them all. For years, she had lived quietly, never drawing attention to herself, never offering more than a gentle smile or a whispered blessing. The sisters respected her privacy, but curiosity lingered in the corners of their minds. Why did she look at the piano that way? Why did her voice sometimes tremble when music filled the hall? One late evening, after prayers were finished and the convent was still, a young sister named Clara walked past Maria's small room. The door was slightly open, and inside, she heard something unexpected. A melody. It was not the sound of keys, but of a voice, Maria's voice, soft and low, humming a tune. The sound floated into the corridor like smoke from a hidden fire. Clara froze, listening. The melody was unlike anything she had heard before, gentle yet filled with sorrow. Every note carried weight, as if it was tied to memory. Clara told no one at first, but the next night, another sister passed by and heard it too. Soon, whispers began to spread among the younger nuns. She hums at night, one said, not like us. Like someone who has lived inside music, the whispers grew. They wondered quietly during their chores. Was she once a musician? Maybe she played in concerts. Maybe she taught somewhere. Their guesses moved like ripples, never reaching Maria's ears, but always circling closer to the truth. The Mother Superior, wise and watchful, noticed these whispers. She did not scold, for she too had begun to wonder. She had seen the way Maria's hands hovered near the piano when she thought no one was looking. She had noticed the way her eyes carried both longing and fear when the children asked her to play one afternoon. After the children's visit, Clara finally found the courage to ask gently, Sister Maria, do you know music? Maria paused, her broom resting against the floor. For a long moment, she did not answer. Her eyes softened, her lips curved into a faint smile. Once she whispered, and then walked away, leaving Clara with more questions than answers. That single word once spread quietly among the sisters. It only deepened the mystery. What did she mean? Once when? Once where? The piano, standing tall in the hall, seemed to hold the answers they could not reach. To them, it was just an instrument. But to Maria, it was a locked door. Behind it was a life she had sealed away the day she entered the convent, a life of bright lights, applause, and a name once known, but Maria never spoke of it. Her silence was her shield. She believed her old life was gone, a part of the world she had promised to leave behind. Yet silence does not erase memory, it only buries it, waiting for the right sound to dig it up. One stormy evening, when thunder rolled across the skies and rain tapped against the windows, the sisters gathered in the hall. The power flickered, and the young nun at the piano began to play softly to calm the children. Maria sat in the corner, her hands clasped tightly. The storm outside matched the storm inside her chest. Lightning flashed through the tall windows, illuminating the piano. For a brief moment, Maria's breath caught. For an instant, she saw not the convent hall, but another place, a grand concert room. Rows of people waiting in silence, her own hands poised above the keys. She blinked and it was gone. One of the children noticed her faraway look and whispered to another, she remembers something. The words, though innocent, struck deep. Maria did remember. She remembered everything she had tried so hard to forget that night as she lay in her small bed. She closed her eyes and saw her past clearly. She remembered the first time she had touched a piano as a child, the way the keys had felt under her fingers, the way her parents' faces had shone with pride. She remembered the applause, the travel, the endless nights of music that had filled her life. and she remembered the pain, to the loss, the grief that had driven her to the convent, seeking peace, seeking silence. The whispers among the sisters grew into quiet wonder. They respected her privacy, but they could not ignore what they felt. This was no ordinary nun. She carried something hidden, something extraordinary. Maria knew the whispers were growing. She could feel the weight of their curious eyes. She did not blame them. She only prayed harder, asking for strength to keep her silence. But even as she prayed, she knew the truth. Silence could not last. Forever, the piano waited, the children waited. And the whispers of the past grew louder with every passing day. Maria could not escape them forever. The music inside her was stirring, calling. Ready to break through the walls she had built? The convent had always been a place of small gatherings, quiet prayers, and humble celebrations. But one year was different. A large charity concert was planned in the convent's hall, the village. Council wanted to raise funds for orphans, and the convent had offered its space. It would be the biggest event the sisters had seen in many years. Preparations began weeks in advance. The hall was decorated with white flowers and simple ribbons. Tables were set along the sides, candles polished until they shone. The piano, which usually sat quietly against the wall, was moved to the center of the stage. Its black surface gleamed under the care of the sisters who dusted and polished it. Daily, for everyone else, it was just an instrument to fill the evening with music. But for Sister Maria, it became an unspoken weight. Every time she passed it, her steps slowed. Every time the younger nuns spoke of the concert, her heart tightened. The guest of honor was to be a pianist from the nearby town. A man known for his skill and charm. The sisters spoke of him with excitement. "He will make the night unforgettable," one said. "His playing will bring tears to every heart," another added. Maria listened quietly, nodding, but inside her chest, something stirred. She knew the piano would not forgive her silence forever. Still, she told herself it was not her burden. The event belonged to others. She would sweep the floors, guide the children, and stay in the background as she always did on the night of the event. The hall was filled with people, villagers, guests from nearby towns, and even travelers passing through. Everyone had come. The air buzzed with anticipation. The children sat cross-legged in the front rows, their eyes bright. The sisters moved gracefully through the crowd, greeting and guiding people to their seats. Sister Maria remained near the back, as she always did. She watched quietly as the crowd grew still, waiting for the pianist. The stage lights glowed softly. The piano stood ready. Every detail seemed perfect except for one. Message arrived, whispered into the ear of the Mother Superior. The pianist had fallen ill. He would not come. The news spread quickly among the sisters. Their faces grew pale. A murmur rippled through the hall. What will we do? The concert cannot go on without music. The Mother Superior tried to calm the room. But the crowd was restless. People had come from far. Some had donated generously. The children looked confused, their joy slipping away. All eyes drifted toward the empty piano, standing like a silent question no one could answer in the corner. Sister Maria's breath caught. She pressed her hands tightly together. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat. She wanted to step back, to slip into the shadows, but something inside her told her to stay. One of the younger nuns whispered, "Maybe someone among us can try." Just a hymn, just something small, but none of them had the skill. They could play simple songs, but not enough to hold a hall full of people. Not enough to save an event meant to bring hope. Then, slowly, almost unwillingly, the eyes of the sisters turned to Maria. One after another they looked at her, silent but certain. They had seen her pause near the piano. They had heard her humming. They had whispered about her past. They knew even if she had never admitted it. Maria felt the weight of their gaze. She shook her head softly, whispering, "No." But the Mother Superior stepped closer. Her voice low but firm. "Sister Maria, will you try?" The hall grew tense. The murmurs stopped. The children leaned forward, curious and hopeful. Maria's chest tightened. Her eyes filled with memories she had locked away for decades. Lips parted, but no sound came out. For a long moment, she did not move. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then slowly she nodded. Her body trembled. Her hands shook. But she took a step forward. The crowd parted slightly. The sound of her shoes on the wooden floor echoing through the hall. Every eye was on her now, the quiet nun who had always swept floors and folded laundry, the one no one ever expected to. C on stage walked toward the piano. She reached the bench and sat. Her hands rested on her lap, her head bowed as if in prayer. The audience held its breath. Some whispered, "Can she really play?" Others simply watched, curious, uncertain. Maria lifted her hands slowly. Her fingers hovered above the keys. They trembled with age, but also with memory, for the first time in decades. She touched the piano not as a shadow in the night, not as a secret, but before everyone. And though she had not yet played a single note, the hall was already silent, waiting. The hall was hushed. As though the very walls were holding their breath, Sister Maria sat at the piano. Her body small against its polished frame, the light above cast a soft glow on her silver hair. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling to the crowd. She looked like an elderly nun making a brave attempt to fill an empty silence. No one truly expected much. Some whispered kindly, "She will play a hymn." Perhaps others thought, "She is too old, her fingers too frail." The children, however, leaned forward eagerly. Their wide eyes shone with hope. Maria's heart pounded against her ribs. She could hear it louder than the faint coughs and shifting chairs in the audience. For years, she had hidden. For years, she had told herself her gift was no longer hers. Now every eye was upon her, waiting. Her silence could no longer protect her. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. Her mind raced back to her youth, to the grand stages where she once stood. She remembered the heavy curtains, the glittering lights, the faces of strangers waiting in reverent silence. She remembered her hands swift, confident, alive with music. Then she remembered the loss that had broken her spirit. The day she swore never to play again, her fingers trembled above the keys. She whispered a prayer beneath her breath. "Lord, let my hands serve, not for pride, not for glory, but for love." Slowly. She lowered her right hand, pressing a single note. The sound rang out, clear and pure, cutting through the still air. It was only one note, yet it held weight, like the toll of a distant bell. The crowd leaned in, silent. Maria pressed another key, then another. Her hands moved slowly, testing. As though rediscovering a language she had not spoken in decades, the first few bars were hesitant. Her fingers stiff, but with each note her hands began to loosen. The music inside her buried, locked away. Long forgotten pushed forward like water breaking through stone. Her trembling lessened. Her back straightened, her eyes opened, and they no longer looked tired but alive. The younger nuns standing in the wings exchanged glances. Their whispers of curiosity were now replaced by awe. The Mother Superior folded her hands and bowed her head, her eyes glistening. She had always suspected. But even she had not imagined this. Maria's hands began to move with more certainty. Her fingers glided over the keys, finding strength in the very act of surrendering. The melody that rose was not a hymn, a simple song. It was something deep, rich with emotion, a piece she had carried in her heart since long before the convent. The hall was transfixed. The children stopped fidgeting, their playful energy replaced with stillness. Some leaned against each other, listening as though the music itself was speaking to them. Villagers who had come expecting entertainment found themselves struck silent, their eyes fixed on the frail woman whose music filled the air with something larger than words. Maria felt the room around her fade. She was no longer in the convent hall. She was back in the grand concert room of her youth, the world before her. The piano alive under her fingers. The sound was not just notes, it was her life, her sorrow, her joy, her loss, her healing. The past she had tried to bury spilled into every chord. She thought of her parents, who had sat proudly in the front row. She thought of the moments of standing ovations, of her career that ended with tragedy, and of the years of silence that followed. Each note was a confession, a prayer, and it released. The audience, too, felt it. Some wiped their eyes quietly. Others leaned forward, unable to move. The music carried them somewhere beyond the hall. Each listener felt as if Maria's heart had opened directly into theirs, as the piece rose and fell. Maria felt tears in her own eyes. She had kept her music, hidden for so long, afraid it was no longer hers, afraid it would stir old pain. Yet now, she saw the truth. It was not hers to keep. It had always been meant to be shared. Her final notes lingered in the air like a soft echo, then faded into silence for a long moment. No one moved. The hall was frozen, breathless. Maria's hands fell gently into her lap, her body trembling from the weight of what she had released. Then, as if waking from a dream, the audience rose. The sound of applause thundered through the hall. Some clapped, some cried. Some simply stood with their hands pressed to their hearts. The children clapped the loudest of all, their faces glowing with joy. Sister Maria lowered her head. She did not smile widely. She did not seek praise. She whispered quietly, "Thank you, Lord, for her." The moment was not about recognition. It was about finally letting go. The decision had been made. The silence she had carried for so many years was broken. The music was alive again. And though the applause roared, the greatest sound for Maria was the soft peace within her own heart. When the final note faded into the air, the hall seemed to hold on to it, as if even the walls were unwilling to let it go. For a long breath, no one clapped, no one whispered, no one moved. It was as if time itself had stopped. Sister Maria sat, frozen at the piano, her hands still resting lightly on the keys. Chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breath. She had played not for applause, not for pride, but because something inside her had demanded to be set free. And now, that silence after the music felt heavier than anything she had ever known. The children in the front row stared wide-eyed. Their mouths were slightly open, as though they had just seen something they could not explain. One girl whispered softly, "It's like magic." Her voice was so quiet, but in the silence, it carried. The adults, too, were struck still. Some had tears on their cheeks. Though they did not notice, others simply sat with their heads bowed, as if in prayer. The music had reached them in a place where words could not go. It was not a performance they had witnessed. It was something deeper, unveiling of a soul. Finally, as if waking from a dream. The hall erupted. Applause thundered, loud and unrestrained. The sound filled the space that had moments before been so hushed. People rose to their feet, clapping with all their strength. Some cried openly, others smiled through their tears. The children clapped with their small hands as fast as they could, shouting, "Sister Maria! Sister Maria!" Maria bowed her head, her eyes glistening, but she did not lift her arms to bask in the praise. She was not the young pianist she once had been, standing proudly in front of grand audiences. She was a humble nun, and her music was not meant to draw glory to herself. Her heart whispered only one prayer: "Thank you for letting me play again." The Mother Superior stood at the side, her usually stern face softened. She watched with pride and awe. She had lived many years in the convent, had seen many events, but she had never seen anything like this. She knew that what the crowd had felt was not simply talent, but truth. Maria had given them her whole heart through those keys. When the applause finally slowed, the hall still buzzed with energy. People turned to one another whispering, "Who is she? How could she play like that? Why did no one know?" Questions filled the room, but Maria herself stayed quiet. She sat for a moment longer at the bench, her fingers brushing the keys softly. As though saying goodbye, then she stood, her back slightly bent, and turned to leave the stage. As she walked toward the wings, a young boy ran forward before anyone could stop him. He tugged gently at her robe and looked up with shining eyes. "Will you play again?" he asked. His voice trembled with hope. The hall grew quiet again, listening for her answer. Maria bent down slowly, her old knees protesting. She looked at the boy and smiled. "Perhaps one day," she said softly, "but tonight the music was enough." She touched his cheek gently, then turned and walked off the stage. Behind her, the piano sat gleaming, its keys still warm from her hands. It had waited years for her touch. And now, after one night, it had spoken again through her. In the convent halls that night, no one slept easily. Sisters gathered in whispers, their hearts still full. "Did you see her hands?" One said, "So steady, so alive." Another shook her head in wonder. Why did she hide it all these years? The children who had come went home with wide eyes and stories they would tell again and again. She played like the stars were singing. One said to his parents, like the whole world was listening, even the villagers who had never cared for music before found themselves replaying the sound in their minds as they walked home. The silence of the night after such music felt almost too heavy, so the earth itself remembered what it had heard. And Sister Maria, in her small room, sat by the window, the moonlight touching her face. Her hands still tingled with memory. She looked down at them, the same hands that had scrubbed floors and folded cloth for decades. The same hands that had once been trained for greatness, and tonight had been used again for something even greater. Not fame, not pride, but healing tears slipped down her cheeks. Not of sorrow, but of release. She whispered into the quiet, "I thought I had buried it." But music does not die. Her voice was soft but steady. The hall had fallen silent when she played. But it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of awe, of hearts being touched so deeply they forgot how to breathe. That silence, more than the applause that followed, is what stayed with her. For in that silence, she had heard what she needed most. She had heard that her gift still mattered. The night of the concert ended, but the memory of it did not fade in the days that followed. The village still spoke of what had happened. People at the market whispered to each other, "Did you hear her play? The quiet nun?" The children ran through the streets, telling anyone who would listen about the music that had silenced a hall inside the convent. Life went on much the same. Prayers were said, floors were swept, meals were shared in the same humble silence. But something invisible had shifted. The sisters looked at Sister Maria differently now, not with curiosity, but with reverence. They had always respected her gentleness, but now they knew she carried a depth they had never imagined. One morning, a young nun approached her in the garden. "Sister Maria," she asked softly, "why did you never tell us?" Maria paused, her hands stilling in the soil where she was planting herbs. She looked up with a faint smile, her eyes calm but shadowed. "Because music was not meant to be mine alone," she said, "and I thought my time for it had ended." The young nun wanted to ask more, but Maria's tone made it clear. This was not a secret she kept out of pride, but out of pain, so she only nodded. And together, they planted in silence the soft earth, covering the seeds like the years had covered Maria's story. But the whispers outside the convent grew louder. People wanted to know more. Who was she before she wore the habit? Where had she learned to play like that? Some said she must have been famous once. Others said she had been a teacher. The truth was simpler and heavier than either guess. One evening, the Mother Superior asked Maria to sit with her. The fire in the room glowed warmly, casting light on the lined faces of both women. "Sister," the mother began gently, "they are asking about you. They want to know who you were." Maria lowered her eyes, her fingers twisting together. "I was no one," she whispered. "No." But the Mother Superior leaned closer. "You were not no one. The way you played told us everything. Your life is written in that music. Do not be afraid to share it." Maria closed her eyes, and for the first time in decades, she allowed herself to speak. "Before I came here, I was a pianist. I traveled. I played in halls filled with people. Music was my whole life." Her voice grew quiet, trembling, but then came the loss. My parents, the war, the emptiness. The music became too heavy. Every note was a reminder of what I no longer had, so I left it. I came here, and I promised myself I would never play again. The Mother Superior listened in silence, her eyes soft. When Maria finished, she reached out and took her hand. "And yet you played, and in that music. None of us heard pain alone, we heard hope. The truth was not shouted in the streets, it was not written in books, but quietly, through conversations and whispers, the story of the quiet nun spread. Not as a tale of a famous pianist who had vanished, but as a lesson that gifts, even when buried, are never truly lost. They live inside, waiting for the moment when they are needed again. The children came back week after week, and each time at least one would ask, "Will you play for us again?" Maria often smiled and said, "Not today, but sometimes." On rare evenings when the hall was quiet and only the sisters were gathered, she would sit at the piano and let her fingers speak. The sisters learned to treasure those moments. They never asked her to play grand pieces. They never pressed her for more than she wished to give. But when she played, they listened with their whole hearts. Because they knew the sound was not just music, it was healing. Years passed, and Sister Maria grew weaker with age. Her steps slowed, her hands trembled more. But when she touched the piano, her spirit was young again. The music never left her. It was her prayer, her confession, her gift. And when she could no longer play, the piano remained in the hall, polished and waiting. But the memory of that night lived on. The villagers still spoke of the evening the hall had fallen silent. The children she once played for grew into adults, and they carried the story with them, telling their own children about the nun who had hidden her gift until one night it lit the hearts of everyone in the room. Sister Maria never claimed glory, never asked for recognition. She only left behind the quiet truth that sometimes the greatest gifts are not in what we achieve for the world, but in what we hold back until the right moment. When sharing them means everything, the night she first played at the concert remained her legacy. Not because she had been brilliant, though she was. Not because she had been once famous, though she had, but because in a hall filled with doubt, sorrow, and waiting, her music had opened hearts, and in that moment, silence itself had bowed before her.